everybody, and welcome to another edition of You're Just Stupid, the podcast that makes you smarter and stupider at the same time. I'm your host, Ray, aka the Fart Garden, and over here I have Rene, aka Scalp Me Daddy.
You know, I'm not gonna lie, I'm super jealous of Fart Garden. I was super gassy today. I was my own Fart Garden.
The best thing about the Fart Garden is no one really knows exactly what it is, but the more you think about it, the funnier
Oh
it
yeah,
gets.
it's hilarious. I'm jealous that that's not my nickname today. I'm envious. And really, what does Fart Garden mean? You know what Fart Garden means, or do you? In fact, that's the topic of today's episode. Fart Garden. No, I'm just joking.
Well, actually, our AKAs, your AKA said that it had something
Yeah,
to do with the
it actually
episode.
is relevant. I thought about doing more relevant to the episode AKAs, but I'm like, no, I don't always do that because I'm an agent of chaos. But yes, Scalp Me Daddy is actually relevant to today's podcast. So Ray, let me ask you: when you were a little girl, did you ever play Cowboys and Indians?
Yes, I
You
did.
did. Okay, what side were you on? Okay, neat. I actually was afraid you were going to say no. Like, damn it, Ray, you fucked up my intro. But I'm glad you said yes.
No, I used to be the Indians,
Oh,
and
good.
my name was Wolf Feather.
Oh, that's fucking awesome. So, and he still is to this day. No, so you'll be interested in this episode. Maybe it will make you. Well, it might make you a little angry because of the long term outcome, but you'll like it because this is a victory for you and your people today. Because I've been for a while. I've been wanting to talk about just in general, like really famous people that everyone knows but doesn't really know. I've been kind of wanting to do
Okay.
episodes on people, and you and I've talked about this, and we've thrown around a couple names, but I kind of stumbled upon this guy, and I'm like, you know what? He's an interesting guy, and I want us to figure out by the end of the episode, was he a war hero, an idiot, or a narcissist?
Or all three,
Or all
possibly.
three, possibly. Um, so we're talking about George Armstrong Custer, aka the famous Custer of Custer's Last Stand. Do you know this guy at all?
Isn't he General Custer,
He
like
he.
from Clue?
Well, that was Colonel Mustard, and he killed. God damn it, Ray. Anyways, well, yes, he was briefly a general. I'll get more into that in a moment, but he was more like Colonel Custer,
Okay,
and
I don't know him.
he was most famous for being massacred at the Battle of Little Bighorn in
Oh,
1876. So he's
okay.
actually really like. It's funny. You think like, okay, why is this guy famous? And it's kind of interesting because I'll get into this part now, but basically, he, long story short, General Custer, amongst many other things, was a publicity hound. He wanted to be famous. And ironically, as we'll mention in the end of the episode, he got his wish. He got famous. And even though he died in 1876, people still talk about him to this day, 150 years later.
So he's an American, I'm
He's an
guessing.
American, yeah. So he was born in Ohio. Kind of just get briefly into his background. He was born in Ohio. He had a couple of brothers, and amongst other things, he was noted as a child was that he loved to pull pranks. Him and his brothers loved to pull pranks.
Okay.
He liked to joke around a lot, and you'll see that in a lot of his quotes. He is a very braggadocious person, very over the top. Like this is a guy who, if you ever see, I'm gonna actually text you a picture of him right now, so that way you kind of see what he looks like. He's not your usual like. So to kind of describe how this guy looked in general before we get more into his kind of his personal life, like imagine fairly tall, fairly athletic, but like big, long, flowing, like golden brown locks, big mustache. Like when he would go into battle, he would wear like these jackets and these like various animal skins, and they were all blinged out. Would wear like cinnamon and other like vanilla smelling like colognes or perfumes. Like he wanted to stick out a lot everywhere he went. He
Okay.
always wanted to be remembered, and so that's going to be a big running theme of this guy because As he grew up, he became an adult and briefly was a teacher. But more importantly, in 1857, he joined West Point, and he was one of 79 people who joined West Point that year. And it was originally the 5-year course, but it got truncated into 4 when the Civil War started in 1861. He graduated literally at the start of the Civil War. So in this class, guess what rank he graduated? Remember, the
First?
79. Nope, he was definitely not first. He did say, if you can't be the head of the class, you might as well be the foot.
Oh, was he the
He
last
was
then?
last. He was 34th, but only 34
Oh,
graduated. So, yeah, he graduated last because he had a total record of 726 demerits, one of the worst records in the history of West Point. And
do you know what he got the demerits for?
just a lot of times it was just behavioral stuff, like just acting like a goofball, everything. He would, he pull pranks. He just wouldn't turn into, do assignments. He was just always joking around, like he wouldn't take anything seriously. Because basically, it wasn't that he was stupid, it was that he really believed he was the best, and he didn't really need to do anything to prove it or show it or do anything. He, in general, he's like, oh, I'll be fine, I'm gonna pass. Just kind of one of those slackers, like brilliant slackers kind of thing. So normally,
Narcissist.
yeah, definitely, kind of, you already see where the narcissism comes in. But he did graduate, so typically where you graduate is the type of post. But again, the country was at a civil war, so right away he already got assigned to a cavalry regiment, because in general it was seen that he was fairly talented at leading cavalry. When he was first a lieutenant, he was assigned to basically be like, like not necessarily just a messenger, but like the personal aide to a lot of generals. So he got to work very closely with several generals, including Major General McClellan, who was pretty one of the big names of the early part of the Civil War. And to kind of give you an idea of how brash he was, they were attempting in 1862, attempting to cross the river, when one of the other generals, General Bernard, says, "I wish I knew how deep this river was, the Chickahominy River." And General Custer decided to say, "Fuck it, I'll find out." So he dashed
He
forward on his
jumped.
horse. On his horse, just went right in the river, and you could see where the river was. And he goes, "Oh, that's how deep it is, General."
With his poor
Yeah, with
horse?
his poor horse, yeah. Because remember, this guy, very very importantly, he was a cavalry leader. He led men on horseback. That was really what he was known for.
Oh, is that what cavalry means?
Yeah,
I'm
so
stupid.
cavalry. So there's infantry and there's cavalry. So traditionally, cavalry was the people who were mounted on horseback. So if you led a cavalry regiment, you led a regiment of men fighting on horseback. And so it's different type of troops. Now that's cavalry is more like has to deal with like tanks and artillery and stuff like that. But back then, that's what it was. And he seemed to be fairly gifted at that, because eventually he got to lead a few cavalry charges and cavalry uh, raids and other stuff like that. And he seemed to have a knack for it. And eventually he became aide to a lieutenant colonel named Alfred Pleasanton. And I only say this because this is a quote attributed to George Armstrong Custer himself. "I do not believe a father could love his son more than General Pleasanton loves me."
Um,
Yeah.
so did Pleasanton love him that much, or did he just think that he loved him
I
that
don't
much?
know, but I would definitely say it's the latter. Like this, every time you read about this guy, you're like, "Oh wow, he's an asshole. He's a vain asshole." Um,
He just thinks everyone loves
yeah,
him.
he like legitimately, part of all the bling and stuff wasn't it was so people could always see him on the field. Part of it was he
Hmm.
wanted to be like, "Oh, there's General Custer leading the way," blah blah blah. But part of it was also he was under the idea, because eventually in 1863 he takes George Meade becomes the commander of the Army of the Potomac, and so he fired a bunch of people and started promoting younger, more aggressive officers. And he was one of the officers who got promoted to be a cavalry brigade commander. And his idea, basically, and why I bring that up, is he came up with the idea that if I'm going to be leading men, I need to be seen leading from the front. He wasn't a coward. Of all the things that I can say negative, Colonel General George Armstrong Custer was not a coward. He led from the front. He did not hide behind things. He did not. He took bold action quite often. He made a lot of interesting choices in battle. But he was definitely not a coward. And he would, and part again, he was all decked out because he believed that if I led from the front and every man in my brigade could see me and see where I was at and know, there's George Custer, then he felt that he would increase morale.
So it sounds like, I mean, he's definitely not a coward,
He's
but he
definitely not
might not
coward.
actually be brave. Might not even be brave either because, like, it sounds like his ego is so large that he didn't think that he actually would
This
die.
will come back. You are very on the nose of this because this will come back to bite him in the ass in about 15 years.
Hmm. Always
It
does.
always does. So I will say, as I was reading up on him in the Civil War, because he participates in a lot of battles, the most famous of which is Gettysburg. He actually
Okay.
had a lot of victories. Like legitimately, there's a lot of times where he is, he's in charge of a Michigan cavalry brigade of volunteer cavalrymen, and every time like I see him fighting another Confederate, it's another victory for him. He had several successful
Oh, he's
skirmishes
a
and battles.
Confederate?
No, he's a Union soldier. He's the Union. He fought the Confederates. No, he's a Union
Oh,
boy.
just
Yeah,
kidding.
he's a Union boy.
Oh,
No,
okay.
he's a Union boy. Yeah, yeah. Like he fought against General Longstreet's men at Gettysburg, and Longstreet was one of the most famous Confederate generals. And so he
Okay.
fought.
I have to admit, like, I'm not great with my Civil War history. Like, I definitely know Gettysburg and all
Yeah,
that
yeah,
stuff, but like, I just want to make sure that he wasn't
yeah.
a
No, no,
Confederate
no.
guy. And
He's a
yeah.
Union boy. He's a Yankee.
Okay.
I mean, in fact, two of the most famous battles he fought at were Gettysburg and at Potomac's courthouse, which you're familiar with that one, right? That was the last battle of the Civil War. That's
What was
where
it called? The Potomac's Whorehouse?
courthouse. God damn it, Ray! Get your mind out of the gutter. That's where Robert E. Lee famously surrendered to General Grant.
Yes.
Exactly. God damn it, Ray! You failed U.S. history, didn't you?
Wow, I feel like my great grandmother would be so disappointed
She
in
would
me
be
right
just.
now if she knew how bad I was
I was
doing
gonna
with this
say,
Civil War
Ray,
stuff.
did you just like show your tits to your U.S. history teacher to pass? That's what I did.
That's what Rene did for every
That,
teacher,
that's
and
that,
he failed.
and I still failed. I still have a third grade education. Anyways, so he did participate in Battle of Gettysburg, and he actually had several victories. I won't get. I don't want to get much into the Civil War stuff, not just because,
I know nothing about
well,
it.
not because you know nothing about it. I will say this. So I kind of want to talk briefly about what Custer said about his own charge at Gettysburg. Now he did defeat several Confederate generals and officers at Gettysburg. And it should be noted, he said, I challenge the annals of warfare to produce a more brilliant or successful charge of cavalry. Custer wrote in his own report.
I really just want to fart garden right in his face.
However, it's also been calculated that he also lost the most men of any cavalry brigade, also at Gettysburg. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I really want to paint this picture, and I really want to use a lot of his own quotes. He also said, "Come on, He also said, "Come on, Wolverines" to his own men. So Michigan Wolverines were a thing back then too.
Nice little fart garden. So you said that you're not gonna be focused on the Civil War that much. So what are we talking
Well,
about?
because he still had 11 years of life after the Civil War, and that's actually where his life got even more interesting. Believe it or not. Like
Okay.
this has all been pretty interesting, but like I'm glossing over it because a lot of people know Civil War history. You know, it's pretty easy to look up records of all this. I will say briefly, he was at Appomattox courthouse. God, it's hard to say. And he famously, his division received the first flag of truce from any Confederate force, and he had actually was trying to convince General Longstreet to basically surrender to him and General Sheridan. I want you to remember the name of General Sheridan because he's going to pop up again. Because he
Okay.
is fucked up also. So he's there and he's trying to get surrender. And eventually, General Longstreet reports that General Lee's actually gone to surrender to General Grant, which that happens. To give you an idea of how well thought of Custer was at this time, the table where they signed the basically the treaty to end the Civil War, that was actually gifted from General Sheridan to Custer's late wife after he passed away, and it now resides at the Smithsonian.
That guy felt like his wife deserved that because of Custer's.
Meritus behavior, because the
Gotcha.
one thing Custer kind of does, and it doesn't necessarily cite specific articles, but one thing he likes to do is write journals and stories, and he submits it to various newspapers and journals, basically all his military exploits, and he writes them and sends them, and a lot of times he will start bringing members of the Associated Press along with him to document everything he does. One thing he loves, like I said, is fame, and he wants it all documented. In
Hmm.
fact, even up to this day on Amazon, you can buy basically his biography about his autobiography about a lot of his time traveling the plains and fighting the Civil War and fighting American Indians and everything.
That sounds pretty interesting. I
Yeah,
probably would read that,
it's like
although it's
$8.
probably very
It's
dry.
probably very dry and very egotistical. So the Civil Wars ended. This is where his life kind of starts getting a little more interesting, because he initially goes to Texas. He's trying to help with the effort to, kind of bring the Confederate States back in. And then he gets an offer from Benito Juarez. Are you familiar with him?
Benito
Yeah,
Juarez. No.
he's basically a famous Mexican who was a leader in Mexico, who was fighting against the Mexican emperor, who was a basically a puppet of Napoleon III's government, the French government, and basically he offered him a position as a general of the army and $10,000 in gold to go become a general in the Mexican army, and he wanted to take it. And he actually asked for a year off from the American army to go to Mexico and fight in Mexico and be a Mexican general.
I didn't think you were allowed to do that.
You are not. Even though General Sheridan,
Nailed it.
yeah, exactly. In fact, actually, originally General Grant actually said he was okay with it, which is kind of surprising. And Ulysses S. Grant will come up in this
People are
episode.
like, let's get rid of this
Yeah.
motherfucker. He's so
Oh,
annoying.
trust me. I think you're gonna like General Grant's overall treatment of General of Custer after a while. And by the way, quick aside, I like to think I want to do in one of these episodes on Ulysses S. Grant, because everybody knows him. He's on the $50 bill, but he was the general that won the war for the North. But I don't think people really know him. He was kind of an interesting guy. He might be one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, like legitimately. General Grant, but kind of during that whole time after between Lincoln and I want to say like Woodrow Wilson, like all those presidents are kind of forgotten about. I'm not necessarily going to say he's a good president, but I think he's like Jimmy Carter, where I think he wasn't necessarily a good president, but he was a good man, and was a little over his head. He
So Custard is in
no,
Mexico.
he never goes to Mexico. What does happen
But you
though?
just said he was in Mexico
No,
for a year.
no, they tried to recruit him to Mexico, but it failed.
Oh.
So instead, he goes with President Andrew Johnson on a train known as Swing Around the Circle, drumming up public support for all of Johnson's policies of reuniting the South and the North. And he kept approaching newspapers and giving rah rah speeches. Funny enough, people said, "Hey, you're only doing this because you want Johnson to give you some kind of political commission." He's like, "Of course I didn't. I wouldn't do that. Why would I ever do that?" So yeah, he had several weeks before he got started asked President Johnson for a political commission. He lied about it.
I mean, that's probably just a bonus because he probably loved that job if he was like giving
Oh yeah, and
speeches
hanging
and
out with
being
the
like an
president.
influencer.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Right.
Like this guy would straight up be like on TikTok today. Like he would be on YouTube. He'd be a Fortnite VTuber, fucking Twitch, TikTok asshole, Instagram pretty boy, and he would have like 8 abs, and he would ask me if I get enough protein, and you'd want to choke him out.
He'd be a little metrosexual as well. I get that feeling.
Yeah, he was a I would say he's a dandy. I mean, I sent you a picture of him. How would you describe him in your own words, Ray?
Well, considering I thought he was going to have a white mustache and a mustard looking jacket,
Yeah.
um, like Colonel Mustard, he does look a little bit like a dandy
Yeah. So
or a
to give you an
Sally.
idea of how young he was when all this happened, because he was the youngest. He's one the they actually would call him the boy general because he legitimately, as a brigade commander, he was only 23. He was super young. Like
Oh,
he died at 36. He died as old as I am. So he was a young guy during all this too. That's part of the reason why he probably
well,
was so brash is because he basically fell upwards really quickly, really young. Like he's a very young man when a lot of this crazy shit's happening, and it gets more crazy because in 1866 he gets assigned to the newly created 7th Cavalry Regiment, which, by the way, is still a thing today. The 7th Cavalry Regiment. It's kind of a very infamous regiment for multiple reasons.
so they're still in the army
They're
today.
still in the army today. They're kind of infamous, not just because of what Custer and his men would do, but also in the Korean War, they committed a fairly big massacre of Korean uh, civilians. It's That's another story
Oh,
for another
that's
time.
not good.
Yeah, so the 7th Cavalry is kind of a well-known unit, but anyways, so they can't trace themselves back all the way to this time. So one of the big efforts after the Civil War and a lot of post like union a lot of union officers who were career army men would do is they would find what's called the Indian Wars, which would basically be the westward expansion of the United States west into a lot of American Indian territory, and basically all the various fights with the Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Arop. God, I'm gonna butcher their name. I'll come back to it later when I see it in print. But basically, with a lot of
Okay.
Native Americans, they recruit him specifically because they think that he would be General Sheridan recruits him specifically. And to give you an idea of General Sheridan's overall tactics, because Major General Sheridan was the one assigned to lead all these campaigns, because basically the United States government had told a lot of the Native Americans, "Hey, we want your land. You can move to reservations or else." And a lot of American Indians were like, "No, this is our sacred land. This is our holy land." And this is where a lot of the bad shit the United States did to Native Americans started, was during this time period.
Yeah.
So, anyways, to give you an idea
White
of
guilt is
real thing,
flooding me right now.
it should flood everyone. So, to give you an idea of General Sheridan, he believed in a total war policy. Do you know what total war means?
Um, I feel like I should,
You
and I
should,
feel like
because
this podcast has made me sound really
no, you
stupid, but I
should,
don't
because
know what
you've
it
led a
is.
successful war already, Ray. Remember we talked about this already.
Oh, the War in
The war in
Stone.
stone, yeah. You
Us
call
stoners.
stoners, yeah.
So total.
So total war means basically the idea that there is no limits. If you can attack soft targets, civilian targets, you can. Anything's fair game. Because remember, some of the Native Americans, as settlers were encroaching on their land, then they would kidnap these people, shoot these people, kill these people, chase them off their land, and there's a whole lot of debate on whether is that right or wrong. But in essence, they said, all right, they're killing us, so we're going to go back and kill them and rape their women and burn their villages down and kill all their animals. And
Hmm.
yeah. So he also, General Sheridan, very famously, he says he never said this. There's a lot of sources out there that attribute him saying the only good Indian is a dead Indian. So that's the type of guy who was leading this campaign.
And he believed in total war,
He
so he
believed in total
definitely
war, and
was.
didn't help that President Johnson really also did not like Indians too. He was a big old racist. Big.
I just think it's so unfair when you like learn about like the horrible things that the settlers did to the Native
Yeah.
Americans because they had like guns and gunpowder and all of that technology where the Native Americans didn't have
Oh
that.
no,
So it's
no,
basically
actually,
just like, of course they're.
no. The Native Americans had guns. A lot of times there were guns that they
Oh, maybe
acquired.
I'm thinking. Maybe I'm
You're
still
thinking of the
thinking of like
Spaniards.
Plymouth
Yeah,
Plantation.
you're thinking of like the Spaniards, bro. Yeah, like no, they had guns, and like actually a lot of them were really good with guns. City and Bull definitely knew how to use guns.
All right,
Yeah,
never mind. Oh yeah, I guess when you watch those old
yeah,
shows on like
yeah. They didn't all have
my
bows and arrows.
TV.
No, actually, Yeah. It's like, oh, you don't know how to use guns. God damn it, Ray. Anyway, so ironically, one of the things of note is that he, not long after he got appointed as one of the uh, brigade commanders, he actually was arrested and suspended for going AWOL for visiting his wife. So, actually, funny enough, besides taking, let me mention his wife briefly. So, in 1864, he gets married to his wife, who, let me give me a moment to look up her name, because she's actually really important, believe it or not. And this is not just me, like, talking about it, but he married Elizabeth Clift Bacon, who was his first and only wife. He actually met her when he was 10, and she was a daughter of a judge, and she looked down on him. Sorry, her father looked down on him eventually until he got promoted to the rank of brigadier general, and then he was good enough to marry his wife. And so, sure enough, when he got promoted to the rank of brigadier general, then he gave his permission, and he did achieve that in 1864, and they got married in 1864.
So she must have one hell of an ass.
Probably, I imagine she's got a lot of junk in her trunk. And
I mean,
we're
they have to be good enough for Custer, right?
yeah,
So
yeah. I mean, and his big overinflated ego. So,
she's got huge tracts of land.
ooh, god damn, that's hot. Anyways, look, there's nothing wrong with women who junk in their trunk. I'm gonna say that right now. Anyways, so he actually brought his wife with him on a lot of these expeditions and stuff. She wasn't one who stayed back home. She actually would follow. Not she would usually be close by, and yeah. So sure enough, he got went AWOL, but then again, General Sheridan basically changed his shortened his suspension so he could get him back because he wanted him back for his winter campaign. And sure enough, that wasn't necessarily the worst of ideas because during the
Do we
campaign,
know why he went AWOL?
no,
Sorry to
to visit his
interrupt.
wife, to visit his wife. Like, apparently,
Oh,
yeah, apparently she
okay.
was not near the battlefield, so he wanted to go visit her. From what I understand, him and his wife, it was only his only wife. I don't think she ever remarried, so I
Oh,
think
that's
for the most
nice.
part they loved each other. He may have loved other people too. We'll get to that in a minute.
He probably loved himself a little bit
I think
more.
he definitely loved himself more than anyone else. That's true. Like his wife was definitely number two. So one of the first battles of these wars was called the Battle of Washita River. They not only did they defeat the Cheyenne, but they ended up driving many of the Southern Cheyenne onto a U.S. assigned reservation. General Custer led it, part of Sheridan's forces, and was a big reason why they won. So, kind of just reaffirming that, oh yeah, Custer's our man. He can fight the Native Americans. He knows what he's doing. So then in 1873, and then later on in 1874, Custer starts heading to the Black Hills area, South Dakota. Are you familiar with Black Hills? That's where Mount Rushmore is.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah,
know what Mount Rushmore
yeah.
is because that's the only thing about South Dakota that
That's the
I
only thing that
know of.
anyone knows about either one of the Dakotas, and that's fine. But
And
anyways,
Fargo.
and Fargo. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, also good point.
Don't ya know?
They were up there to protect the settlers because there was rumors that there was gold there. Sure enough, there was. So when Custer announces very loudly, of course, there's gold, what happens? Gold rush.
Fuck yes.
So among the towns that sprung up were Deadwood. You've heard of Deadwood, right?
God damn it. I don't know.
God damn it, Ray. Deadwood, South Dakota is famous for being one of the most lawless towns ever. Like super
Oh
lawless, super
shit.
violent. Yeah, like
And you're
all
saying it was lawless even in like the cowboy era,
in
like the
cowboy era.
1800s. That says something.
Yeah, it was kind of like when I say General Sheridan's racist. This is not coming from a 21st century progressive standpoint. Like people in the 1870s thought General Sheridan was racist against Native Americans. Yeah,
Hmm.
so when when
I would
when when
agree.
people in 1870s say you're racist, you're racist. And remember, this is the guy who is leading this whole campaign against the Native Americans.
Great. A racist leader. That's
So the good
perfect.
news is we no longer have Johnson as president now. We have Ulysses S. Grant, and for many of Grant's faults, I really don't think he was, even if he was racist by our sense, he was definitely a pretty progressive. So he idea is that he wanted to buy the Black Hill from the Lakota, and they refused and said no, this is our land. And eventually, he was forced to, like, okay, we have to get him off this land. We want the gold. Where the gold at? You know,
We are white people. We love
we're
gold.
white people. We love taking valuable resources from minorities. Correct.
I personally don't, but
No,
I
Ray
understand
definitely
that
does.
historically I do.
Ray definitely does. So this is in 1875. So basically, in 1876, Custer's army leaves Fort Abraham Lincoln in April. They already make their first big mistake here because they wanted to move fast because the Lakota warriors were famous for being able to move very fast. Sitting Bull,
Hmm.
Crazy Horse, and their men were famous for being able to escape and flee very quickly, and so they did not want to be weighed down. So what they left at Fort Abraham Lincoln were their sabers, the actual cavalry sabers, which are a real thing, a sword, and that's going to be important. I want you to remember that later on.
Are sword and saber
A saber is a
synonymous?
type of sword, yeah, and specifically cavalry, especially U.S. cavalry, were famous for a type of saber. In fact, a lot of modern like ceremonial stuff still has a U.S. cavalryman saber in like the army and stuff.
Oh, okay. I think I know what you're talking about. Does it have the really skinny? Yeah,
Yeah,
it has the little skinny top.
yeah, and like you see like those swords with their picture with for a lot of ceremonial purposes. That's a cavalry saber. And so they
Gotcha.
left them behind because they thought, okay, we don't need that. So they basically were only equipped with their Springfield carbines, which were known for jamming, and revolvers, their backup piece. So basically, they were being sent on a campaign against the Lakota because the Lakota were hunkering down in several places. One of them, the Black Hills. Another one was the Plains of Greasy Grass, which would eventually also be known as the Little Bighorn. Actually, was originally a Crow settlement that eventually a lot of the Lakota, the Dakota, and other tribes started gathering in and around. And they're all gathering around primarily the two very famous Native American leaders, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. You may have heard of them. I don't know a whole lot about them myself. They might be interesting podcast topics later on myself because everyone's heard of Sitting Bull, everyone's heard of Crazy Horse. They're famous warriors. They fought off the American government for a long time. Sitting Bull himself has a really interesting life from what I've read. They basically did this whole campaign against the Sioux, and the Lakota are a branch of this overall the Sioux tribe. Sorry, and anyone who knows a lot more about Native American culture than I, probably like, dude, you're like throwing around a lot of words, and I'm probably not using it as well as I should be. I don't know. I apologize. I don't know a lot about Native American culture and history. Which as I'm reading this, is actually kind of interesting. I want to learn more.
I wish we learned more about it in
We really
school because I
should. We
think
really should. It's a disservice that
the
we
one thing
do.
we learn about is how, Squanto taught us how to make corn in
Yeah, yeah, and
Massachusetts, and we
Pocahontas.
all
And,
sat down and got along.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And then nothing
I love
bad ever
calling her Poca
happened.
Hot Tits.
I bet she probably had hot tits. Look, we've all jerked
I
off.
bet you she did.
We've all jerked off to that movie at least once in our lives. Yeah, we like really looked legitimately. I use the term Native American because that's what I was taught and raised. But apparently, the actual Indians themselves are okay with being called American Indians. Like they're kind of taking ownership of that word, and so it's
I
not.
wonder why they're okay with it, because it seems like such a racist term.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I remember reading this time because I was having a discussion with someone like, hey, I don't know if Indians the correct terms. Actually, they prefer to be called. And sure enough, they're kind of like I don't know. I don't know if it's like their own ownership of it or something. But a lot of people though just prefer if you just call them by their individual heritage. Like I'm a proud member of the Seminoles, the Crow, the Lakota, which I mean that
That
makes
makes
them that
perfect
makes the most
sense.
sense. Like and I
Absolutely.
mean supposedly I have some Cherokee background, but I swear if you talk to every crazy random person, they claim to have some amount of Native American heritage in them. I don't actually know what it is. I've never taken one of those 23andMe because I would hate to learn that. Just like, dude, you're like 99% Finnish. I'm like, how? My last name ends in a Z.
That you're 99% Finnish. It's because we're siblings. That's how it would happen.
Exactly, and somehow you're Finnish, even though I didn't think you were. Whatever, fucking white people all look the same. Anyways,
I'm pretty much any of the whitest things, all of the whitest countries put
Icelandic.
together, and that's
Icelandic
me.
is definitely one of the widest I can think of. Interestingly enough, as they're getting ready to gear up for this big campaign in 1876, before that, I forgot one key detail, but I do want to talk about it. Custer is called to testify in Washington D.C. So he gets pulled away. He's trying to refuse. General Sheridan is trying to refuse, but he gets pulled to Washington D.C. to testify in Congress.
About anything interesting or no?
Yeah. So how much do you actually know about President Grant and his administration?
I know a picture of him. He's got
He's
like
on the.
buttons on his
I
vest
was like,
and
yeah, he's like on the
he's
$50
got
bill,
like
Ray.
a gray suit.
Yeah, he's on the.
Oh yeah, I don't really see $50 bills that
Yeah,
much, to
it's
be
not a very
honest. Like,
common
when's the last time you've
denomination.
held a $50
Well, I
bill?
mean,
I see 20s. I see Andrew Jackson and George Washington and Lincoln.
and it sucks
Maybe
because
a Benjamin
Jackson
Franklin now
was
and again.
crazy old racist. So basically, the Grant administration was well known for its corruption. I don't think necessarily Grant himself was that corrupt. There really was never charges
Hmm.
against him. It's just he surrounded himself by a bunch of jackasses. One of the big issues was the Secretary of the War at the time was so his name was William Belknap. Was alleged that he had been selling lucrative trading posts at the various forts, and these trading posts would then charge the soldiers exorbitant prices. And so that's what he was being called into question for. Eventually, got impeached for.
Wow, I didn't know he got impeached.
No, this is not Grant. This is the Secretary of War. So there,
Oh,
before there was Secretary of Defense, they had the
Jesus.
Secretary of War, and this was William Belknap. So he didn't originally want to go, and he didn't want to testify, but a lot of people felt, hey, this is our chance because a lot of the soldiers felt that they were being charged way too much for goods and services at these forts. And the other tricky thing is one of the other people accused of doing this was Orville Grant. Now you might be like, hey, he has the same last name as Ulysses S. Grant. And you'd be right because that's his brother. He's like the Frank Stallone of the family, kind of
Interesting.
the fuck up. So, anyways, so Custer originally had he goes to Washington, and he originally had wanted to stay part of the campaign and write his answers, but they're like, nope, we need you. He basically so Custer himself tried to say that he wanted to follow a moderate and prudent course, avoiding prominence. But this is our boy George Armstrong Custer here. Because once he actually goes to Congress, he gives a bunch of substantiated accusations against Belknap, and he personally attacked President Grant's brother Orville on extorting money in exchange for exerting undue influence.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, in front
Okay.
of Congress. So you know who got pissed off?
No.
No, Ulysses S. Grant, Orville's brother, aka the President of the United States. So he's a little pissed off at General Custer, and so he kind of holds him there in Washington. And when the General Alfred Terry, one of the commanders, asks, "Hey, I want Custer back," he's like, "No, I'll just send you another officer." And then General Sherman and General Sheridan are both like, "Hey, we want Custer back," and he's like, "No, I need to meet with him personally before I send off." Because there was a tradition that if you're a rather high-ranking officer, if you were in Washington D.C., you met the president before you went back to whatever your assignment
Makes
was.
sense. It's like Tom Hanks meting the president in
Yeah,
Forrest
exactly.
Gump.
You're in DC. You gotta stop by and see me, baby. I don't know which president would talk like that. I'm gonna say all of them. All of them. You gotta talk to me, Tommy, baby.
Definitely Clinton.
Eventually, Grant said, "Look, I want to meet with Custer personally, and then yes, I'll send him back." General Custer multiple times tried to meet with Grant, but he kept blowing him off. And one time, Grant was there at the White House, and Custer's like, "Hey, I'm here." He's like, "Okay, I'll see you in a little bit." Then 5 hours pass, and Custer's like, "Yeah, fuck this, I'm out." So
He's just
eventually,
totally blowing him off.
yeah, he keeps blowing him off. So he's like, "Fuck this, I'm out." So he leaves Washington D.C. Eventually, he gets arrested because he was not given permission to leave Washington D.C. by President Grant, and he gets dragged back to Washington
Correct.
D.C. When asked by a reporter, Custer calls Grant a modern Caesar. Basically, he says
It's aggressive.
yeah, exactly, our officers to be dragged from railroad trains and ignominiously ordered to stand aside under the whims of this chief magistrate are satisfied. So yeah, he basically called him a tyrant. General Terry, the same one of the generals who had asked for Custer back, said that Custer had tears in his eyes and begged for my aid. How could I resist? And basically, Custer and Terry both wrote telegrams to Grant saying, like, look, we need this man back. He's been successful. We need him back to fight the Sioux campaign. Unfortunately, this kind of backfired because, as I remember, Custer had wrote a lot of documents. He's already traveled with President Johnson. He's testified in front of Congress. He's writing his own memoirs about his time on the hill. There's a lot of journal articles about him. So he's really well known, and a lot of people are kind of getting pissed off. Like, hey, you're holding this guy back when he's needed on the war front. Like, what are you doing? And in fact, how long did this all take? I think this is like over a couple months, actually.
This whole argument of like whether he can,
Yeah,
is that what you're
yeah. He
talking
was
about?
summoned on March 15th, and then he wasn't really let back until like May or yeah, like around May of 1876. So he was like, this whole thing takes a
Jesus.
couple months. So eventually, yeah, on May 8th, Custer is let go because he basically realizes that one of two things is going to happen. If he doesn't let Custer go and they fail, then everyone's going to blame him for holding back this, this guy who could have helped them. And if he does go and he fucks up, now he's got a scapegoat. And this was in May of 1876. Custer's dead by next month.
Oh,
Yeah,
and you
so
said massacred at the beginning, so
he and his forces were indeed massacred. So, anyways, he's released back. He travels back because now they want to start on their campaign against this occupation of Little Bighorn. So, Little Bighorn was this area in Montana that was in a valley next to a couple of rivers that was originally Crow land, but the Lakota and the Arapaho were all gathering together. Now, initial intelligence had said that Sitting Bull had about 800 warriors there, and I want you to remember that number, 800, because they were really
800.
800.
Okay.
They were really fixated on that. But see, Sitting Bull, amongst other things, was charismatic as fuck. There was a big push to. He's like, hey, we need to get people off the reservations to help me fight against the white man. And sure enough, numbers differ, but apparently he got up to anywhere between about 1,000 and 3,500 warriors. Most estimates seem to put around 1,800 to 2,000. So that's about how many warriors Sitting Bull had with him in Little Bighorn. That's a big jump up from
Okay.
800. You gain at least 1,000 more men.
Absolutely.
Eventually, Custer brings about 700 men with weapons. Now, interestingly enough, General Terry, who he was under the supervision of, Grant released Custer basically back to General Terry to be like, hey, you're going to keep an eye on
The
this
one that he was
guy.
crying
Yeah,
to.
the one who kept trying to get him back. He's like, all right, you can have him back. Well, General Terry offered him two things that Custer refused. The first was reinforcements, about another 200 men, and he refused them. And the other thing was
Why?
he thought he had enough men to do it on his own. He didn't want to share the glory. He won the seventh.
Even though he
He,
had, even though he had like way less than
no,
half
remember he
of
thought
the
he had
men.
700. He thought he was going to go up against 800 guys.
Oh, so he didn't
Yeah,
realize
he
that there
did
were
not
all
know
these other
that
guys there. I see.
his intelligence basically because he real quick aside he would work with the Crow General Custer. In fact, there's actually several pictures of him where he would like eat with. So he had Native Americans on his side too. He had Crow scouts with him because they some of
Hmm.
the land occupied was Crow land, and they wanted their land back, and so they worked with the U.S. government and with some of the forces. And there's pictures of him like General Custer like eating and like having dinner with several of his scouts. Was General Custer racist? Probably. Let's be honest. A lot of the guys back then were racist, but he
They
was.
probably were. He probably was only racist for when it didn't benefit him.
Yeah, like for example, like he and there's a lot of stories where he generally treated the Native Americans under his command well. He may not have always treated some of his men well. A lot of the men thought he was brash, arrogant, and would take credit for everything. But it's generally talked about that like the Crows under his command were treated really well. And he's definitely not like General Sheridan, where a good Indian's only a dead Indian. No, he never said anything like that. Like, so I guess you could say he's like the equivalent of like the slave owner who was nice to his slaves. Like,
He probably was too worried about himself anyway, too.
probably, yeah,
So, but
he probably didn't see any difference between them and anyone else who wasn't George Armstrong Custer either. So eventually, it's moving into June. They are scouting around the area of Little Bighorn. And oh, sorry, my other side. So the other thing they forgot. You ever heard of the Gatling gun?
gathering gun?
Gatling gun, Gatling.
No.
So it was basically the first machine gun. It was hand cranked and it would turn multiple barrels around. It could fire 1,200
Oh, that's
rounds a
cool.
minute. Yeah,
Wow.
so it's impressive as shit. The advantage of the Gatling gun is it can fire 1,200 fucking rounds a minute. Also, if you're outnumbered, you know what helps with that? Firing 1,200 fucking rounds a minute. I kind of emphasize like this is a lot of fucking bullets. Now the disadvantage is that these guns are heavy, and to operate one, you have to be standing up. The idea behind it is that it leaves you prone to like sharpshooters or sniper fire because you and like usually two guys operating this, and like one cranking, one feeding the belt in, and they're both prone to like sharpshooters. And the Lakota were famous for their sharpshooters. So General Custer said, "No, no, thanks, General Terry, but I don't need any of your Gatling guns. They're just going to slow me down." Because his idea is he needed to be really, really, really fast to take on the Lakota and the Arapaho and the Dakota. And it's not a bad thought. And he went because remember he's a cavalry guy. He's already on horseback. He's used to being really fast. As he was scouting ahead, originally he saw there's only about 800 people there and some women and children. Colonel Custer, and just real briefly talk about his rank. I keep using the term colonel and general. So he, at this time, he's a colonel. However, during the Civil War, he was made a brevet general, which basically is like a temporary general. It's like in terms of need. So you basically get the rank without getting a lot of the benefits and pay. It was like a wartime thing they used to do. I don't really know a whole lot about it. I won't get into it much. But anyways,
It makes
so
sense, though.
yeah, wartime you gotta get desperate. So that's why a lot of times people call him general, and it's not wrong. He was promoted one time in his life to a general. He was a brigade general.
But because of short staffing.
Yeah, basically short staffing. People getting fired or dying during the Civil War or quitting. But anyways, so originally the plan was he was going to scout on June 25th and attack on June 26th of
Right.
the Little Bighorn. However, as his men were looking around and saw, okay, we see about 800 people, a lot of women, a lot of children. They got spotted by some of the Lakota scouts, and they're like, shit. And so they came up to Custer and were like, hey, what do you want to do? And he says, you know what, fuck it. I don't want this. I don't want the Lakota and the Arapaho and the Dakota and the Cheyenne will all split up and flee. And I don't want that. I want to end them here and now. So we're going to split up into three battalions and surround them and wipe them out. Remember, he thought, and a lot of his tactics were kind of standard cavalry tactics at this time. But the problem is he now split 700 men into, I think his force was the largest, but basically about like 300, 200, 200. Actually, the one division was small, like 100, and the last one was about 100 people protecting the supplies and the baggage train.
Right, and there's like actually like double or triple the amount of
so
Indians
depending on the numbers you're looking at, he is outnumbered anywhere from 3-1 to 5-1.
And he doesn't have any more of those guns.
Yeah, he does not have a Gatling gun. He does not have any sabers either. He just has
sabers.
Yeah. He basically splits into three. And I'm going to get a little briefly into the tactics, not a whole lot, because I'm not a military history type of guy, but I kind of want to talk about this because it kind of sets up what's about to happen. So he was split into three battalions, one led by himself, one led by Major Reno, and one led by Captain Benteen. So initially, Major Reno arrives to the southern end of the village first, starts charging in, and realizes, oh shit, there's like thousands of guys here. And stops about 500, 600 yards short and forms what's called a skirmish line. Basically, this line where every fourth man holds all the horses and the other guys stand there and fire. The problem is, like I said, every fourth guy is holding all the horses, so you've already lost 25% of your firepower.
Exactly, their hands are busy.
Exactly, and now, on top of that, a huge chunk of the native warriors are just charging at him and are just like annihilating him and his forces. And things do not go well for a couple of reasons. First, Captain Benteen shows up late. Oops. And then on top of that, Major Reno legitimately gets rattled at one point. A lot of him and a lot of his men get rattled. At one point, he yells for his men to mount their horses, retreat, dismount their horses, and then remount them all within like a minute. So he's like freaking out. Things are not going well. And eventually, the initial part of the plan was to have Captain Benteen break off part of his army and go and reinforce Custer's part of the army. Unfortunately, what happened was he said, fuck that. I don't know if he got scared or he thought that, look, we need to hold down and bunker here. This is the best chance we got for survival. He was probably right if that was his latter choice, because his amount of the troops suffered the least amount of losses. But then what happened was that left Custer and his men on the other side of the village, like completely, like they had like 300 guys versus like hundreds, maybe not thousand warriors, and basically Custer and his men get fucking slaughtered
Oh, jeez.
on
All
his
of
and
them?
yeah, like almost like literally to a man. In fact, actually, what's really impressive is one of the tactics the United Lakota, Arapaho, Dakota, Cheyenne forces all do is after they kill a soldier, they pick up their firearms and ammunition and use it against them. So they're constantly getting renewed with fresh
I used
ammo
to do that on Call of Duty.
after you would kill people and teabag them
Yeah, then you take their
and
guns.
you take their guns, just like Grand Theft Auto.
Ugh, I fucking love GTA, man.
I know that basically that's what Sitting Bull and those guys did. They went GTA and killed everyone, took their $17 out of their.
They don't kill their horses though. They take them and like make new nice lives for
Yeah, they
them,
didn't do that.
right?
Yeah, Custer actually famously killed a bunch of Native American horses. So
That is just
yeah,
unnecessary and just rude. The
so
horse doesn't get to
yeah,
decide
the
what side it's on.
exactly. Most famously, Custer was shot twice. Once in the heart, which is believed what killed him, and once another bullet grazed his temple. But it's believed the bullet in his heart that killed him. The I believe
I
they
would say that's probably a
I think they
good
said it was like a 45 caliber
hypothesis.
bullet. Yeah. So he died.
Jesus.
Yeah. So he died, and basically once he dies later on in the battle, but once he dies, his men get routed completely. Let me get the exact number of people who died, but basically the idea is that somewhere between 30 to 130 of the Native Americans died, and 160 wounded, versus 268 of the American army died, and 55 more were wounded. So basically, you're looking about 3 and 7 people were casualties in that battle. So that's why they call it a
Hmm.
massacre, and it was a straight up huge. Like basically, the entire Seventh Cavalry retreated, with nothing to show for it, versus the United Tribes basically basically got to save their land and got fought off the white man successfully. It was a big, huge victory for them. It was one of multiple.
And this was Little Bighorn in Montana,
Little
right?
Bighorn in Montana. You can still go there. Apparently, it's really well preserved, like the
Oh, that's good.
battlefield, and they have like this is where this happened. This is where this happened, and a lot of people talk about it. If you're interested in history, it's actually worth visiting. Apparently, like
Hmm.
the I think it's on one of the Native American reservations, and they did a really good job of preserving all of it. There's like a museum there and stuff like that. The big thing though is I want to talk about his death and then what happened afterwards, because this is, you might say, so why is this guy famous? I mean,
I was just gonna ask
yeah.
that. Like,
So first, let's talk about his death, and then we're going to talk about why he's famous. So
okay, so he
after,
gets massacred, one
so
bullet in the heart, and
after
then one bullet grazes temple.
after he dies, so they did. So about 2 days later, General Terry comes to the battlefield and finds everyone massacred, like literally 200 plus men dead and scalp. That was no, scalp
Hmm.
me, daddy. Um,
Oh,
I've done better jokes. I get it. Anyways, so interesting
I've
enough,
heard him say that too.
Custer's body had interesting. So legend has it, according to the Lakota, he had both his eardrums pierced, and the reason why is apparently the Lakota, two Lakota women had found him and said, no, 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 like do not mutilate his body. He is one of us through marriage. Remember where he won the Battle of Washita River? I don't know if you remember that. We talked about that. That he won this
Yeah.
battle. He may have unofficially married Mona Seta, daughter of one of the Cheyenne chiefs. The reason why I say
Ooh.
married is because he supposedly the Lakota believe that he raped her and impregnated her. In their tradition, when you impregnate a woman, you basically marry her. It's the equivalent of marriage.
Okay, so they thought that he was one of
He,
them
he, he basically married
because of
into
that.
them. Interestingly enough, there's kind of dispute. It may have been his brother who did it, because General Custer, among other things, had gonorrhea, and they believe he was sterile from it because he had no children.
Hmm.
So yeah, he may have had gonorrhea. But anyways, there's a lot of people who claim to have killed Custer, anywhere from multiple warriors, including even possibly a woman who may have shot and killed him. One of
Of
the
course, everyone's going to want to say
yeah,
they
there's a lot of
killed
people
him.
killed him. Interestingly enough, Lakota tradition says that they did not know who George Custer was on the battlefield at first. They didn't know who this guy was. They weren't aiming for him. They just killed whoever they're fighting. And then later on, they're like, oh shit, this guy was a big deal. Who we killed? Like we killed someone who was pretty famous.
This guy smells like cinnamon.
Who's
He
this guy?
definitely,
This guy smells
he
good. Yeah. So, anyways,
he's a high-ranking officer.
back going to these women, they were relatives of Mona Sete, and they literally said, "Oh, hey, do not defile his body. He's one of us." However, they pierced both his eardrums after he died with 2 needles, basically.
Like
So
into his brain.
no, just the eardrums, because their idea was they wanted him to hear better,
Ugh.
because originally the U.S. government, including Custer, had made a treaty in 1868 that they were not going to attack any more Native Americans. So they went back on their own treaty, their own peace treaty, and
Hmm.
they thought that, well, look, you went back on your own word. Maybe you can hear better in the afterlife because of your promise broken to stone forehead to never hurt any Native American or fight any Native American again. There's all sorts of other stories about what happened to him. That some of his clothing was taken. Supposedly, one white guy alleges that his arrow was shoved up his penis. All sorts of crazy shit. But what is true? What I thought was interesting, what they talked about was there's a whole lot of stories coming out of this. Supposedly, one person said that General Custer said, "Hurry up, boys, we got them. We'll finish this up and go home to our station soon." Obviously, he was wrong. Another
A little
person,
cocky
yeah,
there,
little
Custard.
cocky. What is true is that a lot of the best sources were the actual Lakota, the Cheyenne, the Dakota, and the Arapaho people who fought it. There's a lot of survivors who went and talked about it, both oral tradition as well as written testimony. And a lot of people said, yeah, they were really underprepared, and they basically, as we charged them, they broke rank and we basically massacred them. So overall, you're like, why is this guy famous? Why is he well known? Okay, yeah, his autobiography's out there, but so are a lot of people. Remember his wife,
The the white one.
Elizabeth? Yeah, the white one. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
So she actually wrote one, two, three, four, 5 books about her late husband,
Oh my gosh.
and basically she went around the country, basically like talking about like, hey, this guy died a hero. He was a Civil War hero. He died fighting for America and all this, because after he died, a lot of people all spent time pointing fingers. Of course, General Grant said Custer died because he was an idiot and he
Hmm.
used bad tactics. And then General like Sheridan and Sherman said no, he died because he didn't have good intel, or he died because we weren't equipped right, or all sorts of excuses. But she made a big campaign, and one of the things that she kind of got was Anheuser Busch, very famously, as like she got an initiative basically saying like they had made a paint. I forget. I actually can't find his name, but basically this painter had painted this painting of General Custer's last stand. It's still a pretty famous portrait of him and his army being massacred by all the Native Americans. As part of their effort with all their beer, every saloon contained a copy of this painting. So every time you went to a saloon and you drank some Anheuser Busch, so some Budweiser, essentially, what did you see? This fucking painting.
Oh yeah, I'm looking it up now.
He kind of became like, almost like, him and his people almost became like a martyr. Like, look at these brave men who were fighting for America and the frontier, and were massacred to a man and scalped. And now you have all these like brave that fought for us, and you can see this painting of this heroic action, and he was sacrificed in essence for the war effort.
So you're saying that he probably wouldn't be nearly as talked about and as famous if there wasn't for this painting that
A combination of
Anheuser-Busch
his
kind of.
kind of a combination of his wife and this painting. This painting, basically, he kind of became a meme in a way. He kind of became a meme before memes. He got in the public conscious, and there's a lot of movies on him. Like as I was looking up, there's like, if you like in type in General Custer's Last Stand or Custer's Last Stand, there's a ton. There's like 5 movies from like 1900 to like 1930s or 1910s, 1930s, all about his famous last stand. So it kind of became this like weird myth. In fact, I was talking to one of our coworkers. Shout out to Rodriguez. When he was young, he had a toy. He had a toy of General Custer. And he actually looked it up on eBay, and it was actually pretty cool. It was like this like figure you can mount on a horse, and had all these little accessories: a hat, a holster with a gun, a belt, a
Mm-hmm.
canteen, all this stuff. And it was a toy. And it was worth like $200 now. He's like, damn, I should have had that toy. My parents probably bought it for like $5 back in the '70s. But anyways, so there was like toys of this guy, movies of this guy, and like his wife had wrote 5 books about him. So like he basically got this big press coverage, and basically a couple things happened as we got further and further away from the event, and we started taking into basically two things happened. One, we took the Native American accounts more into hand, where historians like, no, we can't discount the Native American accounts. These people were there, and so
Of
we took a
course.
lot of their accounts and realized, no, this guy made a lot of blunders, like the fact that he used really bad intelligence. He left the Gatling guns behind. Oh, and the other reason why the sabers were a big deal, because after the Native Americans got closed ranks, what did they do? They didn't just have guns; they went into melee combat with like tomahawks and swords
Oh,
and whatever else they had. And what did all the U.S. soldiers have? Jack shit, because they left their goddamn swords at home. So exactly, so they were easy pickings. And he
you know
refused.
how like when you go like on a trip for a couple of nights, you always bring, like I always bring like an extra pair of underwear or
Yeah,
extra two pairs because I've never really needed them.
I will inevitably shit myself, and I will need them. I mean,
You
I guess
you
yeah,
might. Murphy's Law, you will shit yourself if you don't bring extra underpants.
exactly.
It's the same thing here. You got to bring your
You bring your
sword
sword,
and
guys.
bring your sword.
Always bring your
If you're
sword.
going to war, bring your extra,
Bring,
even if it's a little bit heavier, just bring
yeah,
it.
bring your sword. I don't think this a sword for each man would have slowed them down that much, but I don't know. I've never led a cavalry charge. So, and the other thing is kind of the rehabilitation of Ulysses S. Grant. Also, that's part of what I want to talk about, because for a long time, as the lost cause of the South narrative was playing on in history, Grant was, oh, he got lucky, or he was just a drunk who just got lucky, and he look at how awful his president was, look how corrupt it was. But then, as Grant's image, like he was originally considered for a long time one of the worst presidents, but he's kind of been rehabilitated because it's like, yeah, okay, his presidency was full of a lot of scandals, but it was never him. It was never him, and he pushed for a lot of like he passed like a lot of civil rights legislation for the African Americans. He was huge in fighting the Ku Klux Klan and other like domestic terrorists that were like preventing black people, and he appointed a lot of black people to a lot of positions too. And or if not him, then other governors who were favorable to him did that. And he really like big on civil rights, probably like the biggest up until like let's say Kennedy or Johnson. Really, kind of got lost after him, sadly. The thing was, I think Grant was initially, and we'll get more into this as we do this episode, but I think he was a good man caught in situations he didn't know how to deal with. But as his image has gotten rehabilitated, and people are like, "Yeah, General Grant, he was a good guy." They're like, "Yeah, Grant was right about this guy. He was an
Hmm.
asshole. He was a braggadocious asshole." And as we get further and further away from when his wife wrote all these books and all these movies and toys and other stuff
So
for.
let him go to Mexico in the first
Yeah,
place,
you know
Grant.
what? He should have taken his $10,000 worth of gold and been a Mexican general, fighting the French.
I just can't get over the piercing of the
Yeah,
eardrums. I just can't imagine how painful
I,
that's got to
I
be.
don't I don't no, he was dead. He was a
I know,
yeah.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
I've never heard of anyone doing that to someone else before. It just seems awful.
It seems awful, but I kind of get where they're coming from because he basically the whole U.S. well, amongst many things awful the U.S. government did to Native Americans was that they went back on this 1868 treaty where they said they were going to end all hostilities, and obviously it didn't work because we're talking about the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. So
Right.
and there were still many more controversies and battles, but I mean, this guy kind of. I mean, in the end, as I mentioned at the beginning, so whether he won this way or not, he kind of got what he wanted. I mean,
He totally got what he wanted. I just was gonna say
it's
that.
2022, and we're doing a goddamn podcast episode about this guy who was last in his class at goddamn West Point.
It's kind of cool.
It's
Like it's
kind of
kind of nice to
cool.
know about people that you don't really know in history. I didn't know anything
You didn't know,
about
but now
him.
you know. I hope all of y'all learned something. Hope you got a little smarter and stupider at the same time.
Oh gosh, I sounded so stupid this episode, but I learned a
I
lot.
was gonna say I definitely want to say Custer was smart and stupid. I mean, he graduated West Point, so he obviously wasn't a moron, but he's still a fucking moron in my opinion. A real American hero like G.I. Joe, or maybe not. I'll let y'all decide. So, listeners, was this guy a war hero, an American hero to be remembered, for all his books and toys and movies, or was he just a narcissistic asshole who just got lucky a few times and then eventually his hubris caught up with him? I'll let you all
What do you
decide.
think, Rene?
He had some skill. I think the problem was too often he. I think what happened, what helped too, is when he was fighting the Confederacy, he probably was fighting guys who were either undersupplied, undermanned, and then eventually when he had all these victories, he let his hubris get too big, and he had all these generals clamoring for him. We need him. Got a couple good victories, and so he let his head get too big, and unfortunately, he let his narcissism take over. And yeah, I mean, he fought well in the Civil War. I'm not gonna downplay some of his successes. He obviously won battles. It wasn't like he obviously didn't get lucky every time. But I think what happened is his star power grew. Eventually, his head got bigger than his skill, and it caught up to him.
Also, too, if there's any Native American, American Indian
Yeah,
peoples, can you like let us know like what's I mean, there probably is different answers for different people. Like what's preferred? I understand like your tribe would be like preferred for your name, but like is American Indian offensive or you guys prefer that?
yeah,
Let
and
us know.
and I apologize if that was offensive. I didn't mean to be offensive. I love y'all, and y'all have
It's
suffered enough.
because we're
It's
stupid.
because I'm stupid. I'm trying to get smarter, but I'm getting stupider at the same time.
It's our lack of
Yeah, you have to
education.
remember
Blame it on
every
that.
neuron I devote to learning something for this podcast is another neuron that dies. I've
It's like I went to that winemaking class and I
Yeah,
forgot how to drive.
yeah, exactly.
All right, guys. I hope everyone has a great day.
You guys better have a great day. Or I'm gonna fucking kill you. Just kidding. I love y'all.